This conference will now be recorded. This conference will now be recorded.
Hey, it says it's recording, so we're back. Um, okay, so that pretty much covers the variety of people who are who can be known. There are a lot of other titles of people who do business analysis across the organizations, and you know, we should all be mindful of that. The people you're going to have to work with and do business analysis with may not be BAs, but you may know them under a variety of different titles. So what do BAs generally do? There are a certain number of things that BAs are normally tasked with doing. Um, these are high level indications of the kinds of things that BAs are responsible for. We're looking at the we're looking at our organizations, trying to understand what we do, trying to understand what we want to do, what we need to do in order to improve, and then we're going to be looking at how do we do that. So we want to understand the problems and goals of our organizations. This is something that I will hammer over and over again because I think it's an area where many organizations kind of do organically, but don't necessarily pay specific attention to. It's one of the areas where I feel business analysis deserves to be done better. And again, as we migrate and morph BAs from their project roles, or morph business analysis from a project-based role to an organizational-based role, this is going to be key. Getting to the point where the organization understands what it's doing, what it wants to do, what it needs to do. And that is a key component of business analysis. Once we understand the problems and the goals of the organization, um, we then migrate on towards how do we solve for those problems, how do we address those problems, how do we achieve those goals, what sorts of solutions do we need in order to accomplish what we want to accomplish. We go further forward in that once we understand what the needs and solutions are, then we need to devise strategies for how to achieve those, or how to craft those solutions, how to meet those needs. And overall, what we're doing is really we're driving change in the organization. Uh, I first heard the IIBA talking about BAs as being agents of change a number of years ago, and that has continued. It's, from my perspective, always been a little bit strange because while BAs are the agents of change and the people who are driving change, frequently BAs are not empowered to be driving that change. It has to be done more organically than authoritatively, and that's always been a sticking point for me in terms of the effectiveness of business analysis. What we're really trying to do is to understand how our organization needs to change, why our organization needs to change, and instead, everybody was expecting that what we were supposed to be doing was just gathering the requirements, writing down what somebody else told us to do. Um, a key activity for BAs is uh, being being the bridge between stakeholders, being the force that um, basically drives stakeholders together to collaborate to achieve solutions. It's not about having people on opposite sides of the fence. It's really about getting people together. And this is very clearly something that the Agile paradigm is intended to address, is to break down the walls and the silos of authority and performance across organizations and get people talking to each other and talking together. Um, it's something that certainly has been put forth in the agile paradigms. I think that it still is not has not been as successful as it was intended to be. I think it's a nice idea that many organizations um, culturally refuse to accept. There is just there's a long history of silo type behavior, of protectiveness, all the kinds of things that we know basically conspire against an agile environment. And I think that these are things that are starting to be addressed. They need to be addressed. And as our organizations are more successful in addressing them, the the possibility of agile becomes much more realistic. This is something that as BAs and in the middle of this, you all need to be aware of. And this is one of the things that as we go forward with with this particular course, if you can basically embrace and focus on, you will be able to be that agent of change. But it's going to take dragging the rest of your organization along, kicking and screaming to get there.
Yeah, I'd like to share a little experience on that. I particularly care for the word facilitate. At one of my Scrum meetings, it was actually a retrospective. I'm sorry, not a retrospective. It was actually a stand up, and so basically, I realized that two of our QA personnel were kind of misaligned on expectations. And, you know, I had the product owner there who really resisted me kind of bringing up the topic, even though we were supposed to do our traditional, you know, what did you do yesterday? What are you doing today kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The product owner really resisted that conversation. But at the end, you know, I had to stand up and say, hey, all I'm doing at the end is trying to facilitate this conversation because they're obviously misaligned. And it turned out they were, and set up a meeting and everything. So that was I thought that was a helpful experience I'd share.
Yep, yep. I mean, those kinds of things happen frequently in quasi-agile environments where people think they understand what agile is about, and they really don't, and they, you know, say we have to do these. We have to perform these activities, but we're not really performing these activities. We're just kind of sort of playing pretend. Um, and you know, and it is the case frequently that there are misalignments and misunderstandings. I have to say, the healthcare company that I worked for, they decided they were going to go agile. We were I'm going to say we were a waterfall shop, but we were just an anarchistic shop more than anything else. And they decided that they were going to go agile. And I can remember the first agile project that we were involved in. Um, they brought in on the data warehouse side, they brought in a team of consultants to work on a project, and the consultants were the ones that said, we want to do this under an agile paradigm, and they all said, well, this is a wonderful idea, we want to do agile. And we got into a meeting at one point, and this was after they had been, quote, doing agile for a long time. I got into a meeting with some of the business stakeholders, and it was me. I was at the time the manager of the BA team, um, at a higher level in the company, and we had these business stakeholders, and we had some people from the development team, and we had some people from the QA team, and it was just a nightmare. It was the QA team saying, well, where are the requirements? And the business people, and they said, we can't test anything. Obviously, they were not doing anything agile based. It was somebody who said we were going to do agile, and we still had all of the silos that were there. And the QA people came in and said, well, where are the requirements? And the business people looked at them and said, but we're doing this agile. We don't need any requirements. We're talking to the development team.
That's
And
that's hilarious.
it was just, I just sort of sat there shaking my head, because they had not, they had a business analyst who was, I guess, part of my team, who was theoretically involved in this project. But again, it was not agile, it was quasi-agile. It wasn't even quasi-agile, it was somebody who said agile. And I just, all I could do was shake my head and say, well, if this is your understanding that we don't need any requirements, and the QA team has never talked to anybody on the team, never talked to any of the development people, waiting for somebody to throw something over the wall at them, uh, and the business people sitting there saying, but somebody told us we didn't need any requirements to do this agile. It was just, anyway. But those are the kinds of things that happen, and they exist out there in the world. And I would not be surprised if they exist out there in the world today. I mean, this was a number of years ago, and you would think that by now there's been enough, learning about Agile that people would not just jump into the Agile as, oh yeah, we don't need no stinking requirements. We're just going to go out and write some code. But I got to believe that there are still organizations out there that their conception of Agile is precisely that. So it's a significant uphill battle. So anybody else have anything they want to share before we move on to the IIBA?
Yeah, I got plenty of nightmare stories, but I don't think we have 4 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think we've all got nightmare stories to share. Yeah. Um, so the IIBA, the International Institute of Business Analysis, was formed in the early 2000s. It was sort of similar to the way the Agile the way the Agile Manifesto was put together by a bunch of practitioners who got together and said, we need to talk about this. In the same way, a bunch of business analysts, interestingly enough, out of Toronto, was primarily a bunch of people working on the Canadian side, who got together and said, there are all of these people who are out there in the world doing what they say is business analysis, and we want to really talk about that. And I just noticed that it's about 10:30, and I've jumped into this slide, but maybe what we should do is to take a little bit more formal break for a couple of minutes. Allow me to get another cup of coffee, and allow you guys to do what you need to do, and we'll put it on the clock. So it is by my clock, it's 10:27. How about we go for 17 minutes? So we come back at 10 or 18 minutes. Wow, 18 minutes. 10:45. I'll check in in about 10:40. If everybody's here, we'll get started up again at about 10:40. If not, we can push it to 10:45.
Okay,
Good.
thanks.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. We're back. Thanks for being on time. I appreciate that. Actually, thanks for being early. So we had just started talking a little bit about the IIBA. I said that it was established in the early 2000s and by a group of BA practitioners in the Toronto area who decided that it would be good if business analysis was more formalized and recognized more as a professional domain. I think these were all people who realized they had been doing business analysis for a long time. They realized the value of business analysis to the software development environment, and they decided to put together an organization to support that function. The goal was to basically collect information about the process of business analysis, about the way business analysis was being done, and about the way to be able to help aggregate information to provide some guidance for the people in the community who were doing business analysis. I think this was back before there really was a BA role. It was more about people doing business analysis. And I think the original founders of the IIBA realized that this was more than just a group of tasks that some people were doing, that it was something that deserved some focus. I think they saw the value in doing good business analysis, the value to the organization in performing this function properly. So over the course of its existence, the IIBA has tried to basically continue to solicit information, to aggregate knowledge from across the community about what needed to be done in terms of business analysis in order for organizations to be effective, and how that business analysis can and should be done by the people who were doing it in order for organizations to achieve more successful outcomes to their projects, to their initiatives, to be able to achieve their goals. Basically, to help things to be done better. They as they matured, as the IIBA matured, they realized that perhaps there was an opportunity here to formalize things, and they introduced the idea of certification in business analysis. This was the first certification that was offered by the IIBA was the Certified Business Analysis Professional, the CBAP. Get my little, where am I? I need to pull up something. There we go. Yeah, the first business analysis certification was the CBAP. It was introduced at around the end of 2006, so it's less than 15 years old. It was when the certification came out, it was interesting in that it was a certification that required not only knowledge of business analysis, but also experience in the practice of business analysis. There was a pretty high bar set for achieving the CBAP. I think that was partially motivated perhaps by the number of other certifications that were out there, notably things like the Microsoft certifications, which were substantially knowledge-based and basically allowed anybody who could do some studying and learn some things to say that they were a certified professional. There are pluses and minuses about that, and I'll probably have more to say about that as we go a little bit further along. But the CBAP certainly set a high bar for the standard of business analysis. This was followed up by the second certification that they offered, which was the CCBA. It's the Certificate of Competency in Business Analysis. That was introduced in 2011. Similar to the CBAP, it required not only knowledge of the business analysis domain, but experience. But the experience bar was set a lot lower at about half the level of what a CBAP was required to have, and that's still out there today. And then in 2016. The IIBA introduced what they call an entry-level certification. It's the ECBA, and the ECBA is designed at the level of knowledge more so than practice. ECBA is a knowledge-based certification. You can study for it and you can achieve it. I have mixed feelings about the ECBA because I was one of the people who, because my quote career in the BA environment was from the perspective of formulating and managing BAs, and less so practicing business analysis. The certification requirements for CBAP and even CCBA eluded me because the way they were put together was that if you were not working as a project BA, it was difficult, if not impossible, to qualify. And I've gone over, under, around, and through about this several times. I was one who basically said that the IIBA should craft and implement a certification which responds to the idea that there are people who understand how to do business analysis, who really facilitate the performance of business analysis, who are basically advocates for business analysis across their organizations and publicly, and yet those people, like myself, were not eligible to become IIBA certified. So I was kind of happy when the ECBA was implemented, but the focus, the way it was marketed, never really addressed my concern, which was those of us who have been involved with business analysis for a long time, but not necessarily directly practitioners of business analysis. So that you know, at the same time that they introduced the ECBA, they also announced a further certification, which is at the top level, and it was intended to basically be community thought leaders. Those people, if you're familiar with the big guns in the business analysis environment, people like Barb Karkanord and the Larsons and Coop Coopersmith and Angela Wick, and those people who have been doing business analysis for a long time, but who have also been key drivers in pushing the business analysis domain forward. There is on the horizon, and I don't know how far on the horizon it is, there is a certification that is intended for those thought leaders in the BA community who are not only doing business analysis, but who are really focused on the improvement and the advancement of the business analysis community. That certification hasn't been completely put together and announced yet. And I don't even know if it's on the radar, the current radar for the IIBA at this point. The IIBA has advanced in adding the AAC to its portfolio of certifications. The AAC is, as we'll see, it is a knowledge-based certification which expects a certain amount of experience, but does not necessarily require that experience. And there is another certification which has just been announced as of this summer, which is the CBDA, and that's a certification in business data analytics. This is another certification which is similar to the AAC in that it is a knowledge-based certification which expects a certain amount of experience in the field. And we'll talk about them a little bit later. The Agile extension to the BA body of knowledge. Initially, when the IIBA started considering Agile, they included information about it in the body of knowledge, but it was not really aggregated and put together as a separate environment, a separate perspective. With the publication of BABOK version 3, it was included as a perspective. That's interesting. That's an interesting thing, and we were just talking about that this week actually at a CBAP study group. We were talking about the perspectives in the BA body of knowledge, and Agile is included as one of those perspectives, and yet Agile is it really is a framework and environment for the way any sort of development work can be done. Anything can be done under the perspective, under the environment of Agile. If you look at the body of knowledge at the BABOK, the other perspectives that are included in there are different aspects. There are things like business intelligence, IT infrastructure. Those are the other perspectives that are a couple of the other perspectives that are included in the body of knowledge. And those are specific areas where there are specific tasks that need to be done. There are specific projects, the types of projects that will be done. Agile, on the other hand, is really a framework and sort of, I'm going to hesitate to say, but a methodology for being able to perform any of those types of projects. There are now people who are looking at Agile as a valid way of looking at architectural projects. It's just, it applies once you adopt the idea of an Agile mindset and a way of looking at things from an Agile perspective, the applications of Agile are really kind of unlimited. You can do anything from an Agile perspective. So including it as a specific perspective in the terms of the BABOK is, there are some people that have some questions about it, and I think they're right to have those questions. In any case, what the IIBA resolved to do with the Agile extension to the BA body of knowledge is similar to what they did with the body of knowledge, which is the idea was to aggregate generally accepted principles and practices in the field of business analysis that could all be drawn together and put under a single umbrella that said, not these are the things that you need to do to be Agile, but these are the ways that you need to think. This is the way you need to organize yourself and your organization in order to be an Agile organization. The Agile extension talks about the skills and knowledge that BAs need to have in order to function in an Agile context. And I find this very interesting because I think back to my own experience and my own understanding of Agile, and I was kind of advocating for Agile development before people were really thinking about, certainly in the organizations that in the organization that I worked at, certainly before they were thinking about agile as a way to go, and yet what we were doing was development in an environment which was probably more suited to being agile than we wanted to allow it to be. We were in a waterfall environment where things were consistently changing, and I'm sure this echoes a lot of your experience. Things were constantly changing, and yet we were in this waterfall environment where it was very predictive. We were expected to have all of the requirements before we could move on towards development, because that's the way software development was done. And then we found, like so many other organizations, that we got through the development cycle and we got back to presenting this to our business users, and they were dissatisfied because it didn't really meet their needs, because perhaps at the time that we were crafting the quote requirements or writing the code, we didn't really understand their needs. They may not have understood their needs, and yet because they signed off on the requirements, they were stuck with what we had built for them. I had a CIO who, was very hard-nosed about that. He was very much, well, you signed the requirements document, so what did you expect us to build? And there was just not an understanding that, in business, things regularly change. You can't sit down a bunch of stakeholders and ask them in 5 minutes to detail exactly what they need based on what they've been doing for a long time. You can't expect them to have the same needs in 6 months or a year or 2 years that they had previously, because things have changed in the business environment. So where this is all going is that I was one who felt like we needed to be able to respond to change, to be able to move forward and address those changes. And yet I never had any, feeling that would result in us doing anything significantly different from a business analysis perspective. We still needed to deal with stakeholders. We still needed to understand what the stakeholders needed. We still needed to be able to basically set those requirements out in terms that could be understood and consumed by the people that needed to consume them, to wit, the developers and the testers. So really what was being done in terms of business analysis was the same thing that was expected to be done under a waterfall paradigm. The difference was when you did what type of analysis and to what level of detail you needed to do that level of analysis. And I remain firmly committed to that idea that the real difference, the core difference in agile analysis versus analysis in a waterfall environment is not really what needs to be done. It's when it needs to be done and to what level of detail. The agile extension to the BABOK, like the BABOK itself, does not say this is what needs to be done, this is how it needs to be done, this is when it needs to be done. It simply aggregates information and techniques into an environment where, as you work on a project, as you are involved with a project, you select and selectively apply the techniques and tasks that will best allow you to achieve the goals that are set out for your endeavor. They will best allow your organization to move forward in the way that it needs to move forward. One of the things that you will hear or you certainly need to hear a number of times, is that one size does not fit all. As much as there are agile paradigms, Scrum being, a particular example, there are things that need to be done in order to be doing Scrum. The whole goal of any of this is that those things need to be generic enough and adaptable enough that a team can adapt their processes, adapt the way they work in order to fulfill what works best in their environment. So that while there are specific guidelines, everyone needs to be aware that those guidelines are simply guidelines. They're not hardcore rules that need to be followed, and that every time you, in every organization that you work, and really on every initiative that you work, the goal is to take the framework and effectively apply the framework to what needs to be done. I can remember from my own experience, and this was, I can admit to my own set of flaws. When we were talking about, again, back at the healthcare organization, when they were talking about doing things agile, somebody said, well, we're talking about sprint zero. And I said, my flaw was coming from a more academic implementation of Scrum, saying that in the classic Scrum paradigm, there's not a sprint zero, and that anybody who wanted to implement a sprint zero was not really doing Scrum properly. I've long since learned that that was, I don't know, somewhat arrogant of me to say that, and that if Scrum Zero, if doing foundational work, if doing even predictive analysis before implementing a Scrum methodology or before implementing Scrum practices makes sense for the organization that you're working with, then that's the way you should be doing it. You need to recognize that the goal is to craft an environment, craft a methodology that works for your team and works for your team on the project that you're working on right now. Even, experienced Scrum teams may find themselves doing the same kinds of things over and over again for different projects. Certainly, as the team stays together and matures together, they may find that they do the same things over and over again, but they always need to be mindful of the idea that they should be reviewing those things and saying, are we doing these things the best way that we possibly can? And understanding that when you move to a different project, a different team, a different organization, that each of those may have its own implementation, and that's not wrong. If you don't do it that way, then you are doing it wrong. Agile analysis. Agile analysis is interesting because this is, again, going back to the way that Agile has been implemented in so many organizations. Really, and this comes largely from people implementing Scrum literally, instead of understanding what Scrum is about and how it should be implemented. There was, the same way that the people said, well, we're doing Agile, we don't need any requirements. The next step forward to that was, well, we're doing things Agile, but we need requirements, but we don't need a business analyst because we're supposed to have a cross-functional team, and that means our developers get to do our analysis between our developers and our product owner, we do analysis. And again, that is looking at things from a
That is
very,
resounding, by the way. I just wanted to say.
yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's a very myopic view of Scrum. I've had some debates and got into it just recently with some people because I pointed this out, that I said from my perspective, um, the whole Scrum paradigm would probably have been better served had they had, instead of a development team, a delivery team. And had they focused more on the idea that the people who are doing these things need to be a cross-functional team, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody on the team is an expert in everything. It just means that all of the functions of the team, including business analysis, have to be represented on the team, and that everyone on the team has to have, if not the expert capabilities to do anything, at least a healthy respect for the functions that need to be performed in order to deliver a successful product. And this got into a debate recently with people saying, well, you don't understand what it means to be a developer. That Scrum never said that developers needed to be coders. It's supposed to be a cross-functional team, and everybody that works on the team is supposed to be able to do everything. The follow-on to that debate is, yeah, everybody needs to be able to do everything, but everybody doesn't need to be an expert at doing everything. And yet we need expertise on the team in order to do everything. So, I pride myself on the fact that I spent a whole bunch of time writing code, and I still occasionally like to write code. I'm also a tools junkie. I like to test things. I like to play with things. That, to my mind, makes me a good candidate for being a good member of an agile development team, because I can, if push comes to shove, I can write and execute test cases. I can look at code and examine code to understand what the code is doing and how it's doing it. And at the same time, I can do all of the things that are necessary for good business analysis to be done, to work with a product owner, to work with stakeholders, subject matter experts, to elicit information from them, to bring that information to the team. I would argue that a lot of the capabilities that are core capabilities for business analysts, things like facilitation capabilities, communication capabilities, are not necessarily things that people who are more on the technical side of the fence, to wit, developers. And I don't want to say coders, because I think that's kind of a pejorative way of looking at them, but developers and testers who have different perspectives and valuable perspectives to add are not necessarily equipped or interested in being effective facilitators. It's just not the way they think. And are there people on the development side and on the testing side who do think that way? Absolutely. No question about it. If you happen to be one of those people, or if you happen to be involved with those people, they are a blessing. They are people that you should cherish, but you should not expect that from people who have a different perspective, people who are happier when somebody can tell them what to do. They can, they can craft elegant solutions that are just, wonderful when somebody tells them what they need to do. But to extract that information from users and from stakeholders is not their forte. They're never going to be good at it. So respect those people, take advantage of those people, and work with those people. certainly look for those people to be on your team, the people who are truly expert at what they do. And then work with them, help them along, help them understand, you know, fill in the gaps that they may not have so that ultimately you have a team that can deliver effective solutions. The same way, there are a lot of business people, business stakeholders, even product owners who are not necessarily capable of or interested in dealing with the technical aspects of what needs to be done to deliver an effective solution. They're business experts. They understand exactly what needs to be done. They can, if you hand them a tool, hand them a solution, they can effectively assess whether or not that solution will allow them to do their job to the best of their ability. They can pick apart the solution and show you exactly what needs to be done, but they may not necessarily be capable of articulating that up front, so that when you have a business analysis function, an effective business analysis function, that function can draw all of that information out from those people so that the team, the overall team, has a good perspective on what needs to be done and functions together as a quote well-oiled machine. The thing that's occurring to me right now is looking at taking this to a sports analogy, and something like a football team is a really good example of the kinds of things that I'm talking about. There is, if you're, I don't know how familiar y'all are with football, but it's basically there are different positions, and every position has its expertise. Every position has a certain amount of overlap with every other position, with a few minor exceptions. But everybody who gets out on a football field to play the game is expected to have a certain amount of knowledge of the functions that everybody else on that field at that same time needs to be able to execute. They're just not experts at it. And at any particular point in time during the course of a football game, one of those experts may be expected, if not required, to perform one of those functions. I think of things like the quarterback who can throw a block for the running back. Nobody in their right mind really expects a quarterback to be a great blocker, and many people would say, no, the quarterback better not be, expected to block for the running back. But there are times when that's what is needed, and a really truly good quarterback is certainly capable of doing those kinds of things. The same way that any of the other positions, at any point in time, you could be a defensive lineman who actually has the football in his hands and is running towards the goal to score a touchdown. That's just part of the expectation. Nobody says that linemen should be expert at scoring touchdowns, but occasionally they're put in a position where that's what happens. So, there's a level of expertise that they need to understand, that everybody on the team needs to understand and to be able to execute, but everybody does not need to be an expert at everything that needs to be done by everyone on the team. I think that is certainly the case with agile development teams. You know, I think that anybody who is on an agile development team as a member of the development team should understand and be able to function as a scrum master. may not have to do it, but certainly should be able to execute the kinds of things that a Scrum Master needs to be able to do, understand what the Scrum Master brings to the team, and be able to say, we need somebody to do that. And if the Scrum Master doesn't happen to be there right now, I can jump in and say, okay, I need to run the daily Scrum today because the Scrum Master is not available for one reason or another. We don't stop. We don't say, well, we can't run a daily Scrum because the Scrum Master is not here. In terms of the product owner, if the product owner is not available and you have a good business analysis function, somebody understands what the business analysis function is, what the product owner is intended to be doing. They may not have all of the chops that the product owner does. They certainly may not have the authority that the product owner does, but they should be able to interact with the development team to say, okay, what kinds of information do you need? Do I have that information on hand, or do I need to go get that information? These are the kinds of things that normally you would be able to look at the product owner and say, well, I need this information. So it's, these are the kinds of things that really make an agile team and an agile environment work together. And I think that there is now more of an understanding amongst many people in the agile environments that it's about having those capabilities as a part of your team and ensuring that you need to have them available to a certain level, and if that means having specialists on your team, that works as long as those specialists can effectively communicate and interact with the entire team. So as is the case with waterfall environment projects, the goal of business analysis is to drive to better business outcomes. This says faster. I think this is another area where perhaps there is a misunderstanding that exists in the world about the nature of Agile. I think this is an area where Agile, the purpose behind an Agile approach to development is not to complete projects faster. The purpose behind an Agile approach is to deliver value faster. So it's not like you're going to get, a project and say, well, if we do this in a waterfall environment, it will take us 6 months. And because we're doing it in Agile, everybody's going to expect we're going to deliver the product in 3 months. That's just, to my mind, another fallacy of software development. And I'm kind of, migrating into the software development, but I think that it's the paradigm applies across any sort of development, any sort of project where you say we can do this in an agile way. It doesn't necessarily drive towards the conclusion of the project faster. It drives towards deriving value from the project faster. So to introduce a little bit of the AAC, the Agile Analysis certification is intended to help you to understand how to apply the philosophy of Agile development to a software development environment, and to basically help you to learn to perform business analysis from an Agile perspective. That's about the best way that I could describe that. It is the case that Agile is becoming more and more prevalent in the world. The numbers, I think the last numbers that I saw said that there were probably about a third, maybe a little bit more than a third of organizations who were heavily invested in the Agile paradigm or in Agile development, Agile methodologies, and that overall amongst organizations, when you add in the idea of organizations that are investigating Agile, organizations that are in a quasi-Agile, an Agile transformation, um, hybrid Agile modes, those kinds of things, that number increases to somewhere around 3/4. So there's a lot of interest in thinking about things and doing things in a more agile manner. I think some of that is driven by the idea that what's being put forth in the business environment and has been put forth in the business environment for a number of years already is, well, business has to move faster. Things are changing more rapidly in the business world, and as an organization, if we're going to maintain our ability to be competitive in that environment, we're going to have to move faster. We're going to have to be more nimble. We're going to have to be able to change with the change in business. And everybody looks at that and says, well, that means we just need to be more agile. And so what's happened is that has been kind of an impetus for people to say, well, how do we be more agile? Well, we be more agile by doing things using an agile paradigm. I think that's a little bit, potentially a little bit of a fallacy. And again, that goes back to my my whole thought about are we doing agile or are we being agile? Yes, as an organization, if we want to succeed, we need to be more agile. But that doesn't just mean implementing some sort of flavor of agile development and saying we're doing agile, so that means we're being agile. Anybody got any thoughts they want to share on this kind of stuff? You know, I've been talking for quite a while, and yeah, give you guys an opportunity to chime in here.
I have a question.
Sure.
My question is, I've noticed that there is, and I'm not sure how many there are, but I noticed that there are now agile coaches who,
Yep.
it is my understanding, go into organizations to help them. Is that something that is recent, and are there a lot of them? Do you know?
I don't know how many of them there are. I think they're becoming more prevalent. I think that you know, it's a kind of, I want to say it's morphing the Scrum Master. I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. And I think that it's a recognition of the idea that teams and people don't know how to be agile. They know how to do agile. And the way certainly Scrum is put together, the Scrum Master is intended to facilitate the team being agile, to facilitate the team functioning in an agile manner, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the Scrum Master knows how to teach people how to function in an agile environment. The Scrum Master is really intended to facilitate things for the team, to be the problem solver, to be the, you know, the person who works within the organization to clear blockages, that kind of thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the Scrum Master is the person who's supposed to be the teacher, who is supposed to instruct everybody how to function in an agile environment. And I think that's where agile coaches are starting to become more prevalent. I think that it's a recognition that you can't necessarily just send a bunch of people out for Scrum training and assume that they're going to come back and be agile. Really, if you look at what's out there for Scrum training, and I'm focusing again on Scrum because it's the predominant flavor of agile at this point. There's training for Scrum masters. Everybody wants to be a Scrum master. If you look at getting an Agile certification, CSM, or some flavor of Scrum Master is the first place that everybody looks from the technical side. That's, quote, the expectation. If you look from the business side, it's got to be a PO. So you get training on how to be a Scrum product owner. There are training environments where they train development teams, but I would argue that they probably are not nearly as prevalent because, again, this misunderstanding of what it means to be an agile developer, so that you have less of an impetus to say, okay, we need to take all of our developers, we need to take all of our testers, we need to take all of our agile analysts, and they all need to be trained in the flavor of agile that we're working with. They need to be trained as to how to be an effective cross-functional team. I think that that's not out there. People are not making that investment. So the way they get around making that investment is to say, well, okay, we can bring in an agile coach so that the Scrum Master can continue to do what the Scrum Master does, and the agile coach can be in here as the sort of hired gun that we bring in from the outside to teach our entire organization how to do the flavor of agile that we're working with. Does that make sense or answer your question?
It makes sense, but I have one more thing to say, and then I'm going to not hog up the line here. So here's the thing. So what I've seen, just as an observer, is that even just your terminology, like, flavor of agile, it doesn't seem to have like the structure. It seems somewhat abstract, maybe, in the world, and so it seems like everybody's just trying to take a knitted sweater, for example, and fit it to every possible body that's out there. And it seems like there's something that's needed aside from that. Because when I first started looking at Agile, which was, just a couple of years ago, what I saw was that there was a manifesto. I saw that there were some videos about how it can be implemented with fun exercises and stuff like that, amongst the team members. And to this day, I don't think that I've ever gotten a solid, and there may not be, a solid, here's how Agile was intended to work, and here's how, the best practice it so that you get what the results that you want out of it. And I think because of that, in the community of technology and analysis and projects and so forth, people are just modifying and doing what they want to do. Like we have Scrum Waterfall, and it just doesn't make sense.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that I'm going to hypothesize a little bit. Certainly, I'm not on a first name basis with any of the guys that were involved with the origins of the Agile movement or the Scrum methodology. But my guess is that what they had intended was to provide some high-level guidelines. It's the going back to the pure Agile manifesto. It doesn't. The manifesto and the principles of Agile don't say how should this be implemented. They simply say these are the high-level things that we need to consider and we should be addressing. And I think what happened is that people were kind of floundering, not knowing what to do. So they said, okay, well, we need to set down some rules. And so, Scrum came along with its set of rules for how to do it. And people latched onto it because it was the first kind of thing that said, wow, here's something that we can look at, a piece of paper that tells us how to be agile. And that was, as you point out, basically perverted by everybody to say, well, this is the piece of paper that says how to be agile. So if we want to be agile, we have to do what's on this piece of paper. Where the initial idea of agile was, we need to stop doing things the way they are on pieces of paper and do what's going to be effective for us to be able to build solutions. So we had this kind of push-pull going on with one side wanting to say we need to be flexible, we need to be changeable, we need to be adaptable, and the other side saying, but we need the rules. And that's, I think, gone. It's the way things have been implemented for a long time. I think that one of the things about certainly where the IIBA comes forth on this, although even I can see myself doing it now as we're talking about things, constantly falling back into the Scrum kind of thing, because that's what people are most familiar with. That's what people perceive of as agile. And I keep trying to say, okay, well, I need to use the Scrum terminology, use the Scrum rules, because that's what people are familiar with, but re-emphasize the idea that underneath it all, the rules are there to serve as a default and not to serve as a binder or a constraint that says this is the way we have to do it. One of the things that comes to mind in terms of Scrum, again, is that the Scrum paradigm is very big on the idea that you should establish a schedule, your time boxes, and they say over and over again, your time boxes should always be the same length. I think the reason behind that is in a practical sense, they're saying what you really need to do is to be able to establish an expectation from your organization that you're going to deliver value, you're going to deliver product on a regular basis, and the way to do that is to force yourself to do it on a regular basis. Where, to my mind, a fully agile organization should be able to say, you know what, in this particular sense, it makes sense for us to work for 3 weeks in order to deliver this increment of value, instead of saying we have to do it, we have to chop it up, we have to slice and dice it so that we can get it done, we can get something done in 2 weeks because our schedule is 2 weeks. That's the way we have to do it. And that's a balancing act. If your
So
organization, yeah,
would you say that basically there's several methodologies which are of the agile mindset, such as Scrum, Kanban, XP, maybe Dynamic? I think I read.
yeah.
Do you think that? I mean, I perhaps the answer is like a hybrid approach, and that these are all just again guidelines to methodologies.
I would agree wholeheartedly. In fact,
Yes.
my somebody else jumping in.
No, I was just talking out loud. Sorry, I didn't realize I clicked my mic. But since I got the floor, yes, that is what I understand it to be. Is that there's dynamic, Kanban, Crystal, dynamic, FTD, TDD. These are all your agile, if you will, methodologies that are approached with the philosophy of being agile. And yes, within each methodology that you named off, that I named off, there's a process that goes behind it. And again, Tom, you jump in here and say, no, Don, you're wrong. You're way off the
No,
mark.
no, Don, you're right.
Class
You're
is knowing
absolutely right.
when to apply dynamic, when to apply feature-driven
Yep.
testing or development. I'm sorry, not testing, but development.
Yep.
That's I'm trying to figure out is, and I agree with what everyone has said. Ingrid, I think your question earlier was spot on, is what are we really doing? And being a quote unquote, hopefully on one day we all become experts, is saying, no, what you need to do in this particular situation is get away from Scrum and apply feature driven development. And this is
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
this is the process that goes with it. And that to me is being the agile. You're taking what, again, and that's further down the rabbit hole. About your team in place, everybody gets along, and no one is acting as a silo, which I love that terminology. Is saying, hey, no, hey, I know, you've been doing Scrum for a year, but in this particular instance, because the project is smaller in scope, you need XP, and you're like,
You are,
So it
you're,
sounds like what you're saying, and please forgive me for interrupting, is that there needs to be an understanding from our part of that assessment of which one to use. So we would have to be educated and skilled in each one of those in order to make the assessments, right?
that is exactly what I struggle with is one, identifying it, and then how in the world am I going to be agile to implement. And again, I'm no expert on combined XP, FTD, TDD, all of the 8 common practices. You know, um, I that to me that's the $1 million question is identifying it and how in the world am I going to implement it when I've been practicing or preaching or doing Scrum for the last 6 months, a year, and again, I think that's when everybody kind of defaults back to your question, Ingrid, was no, just do it kind of the old waterfall. Just keep doing it Scrum, and we'll cross those bridges when we come to it. And we're really just doing a hybrid of what we've been exposed to, what we're comfortable with, and what's being practical and realistic. And I mean, to me, that's what it is. Like even the other day, and I know I'm jumping around and shifting gears now. I was approached for uh, a BSA role, but it had coach agile. I'm like, how in the world can someone be an agile coach when there's so many different ways to do agile? And then later it was like, well, it's really kind of a product owner, product manager. And I'm like,
Yeah, the
okay,
expectation is unreal out there for sure.
right. I'm like, look, you guys don't know what you're necessarily talking about or doing, and I get that. I'm sympathetic to that, but that's been my experience, and I've only been in a BSA really for 8 years, but the first 4 years, I thought I knew what I was doing. But after, really getting around some more experienced and seasoned people, taking the CBAP and now the AAC here, and the last 4 years, I'm realizing that 4 years prior to the last 4 years, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was getting the job done and everybody was okay and happy, but I was like, man, I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm just, all I'm doing is reacting. So
mhm.
there's that two bit, but again, I'm more junior than you guys, obviously, but that's just my 2 cents or maybe a nickel of it really means to be in terms of agile. And even with
Yep.
all that said, that is so much information. I mean, I'd love to meet an agile expert. I would love to meet that guy, whoever that or woman, whoever that person may be, and be like, wow, how did you come about knowing what what to do at that time and then being able to successfully carry it out with your team members? So
Hmm. Okay, I mean, that's a great discussion, and you bring up, I mean, I was getting chills listening to you guys talk, because I think it's just so spot on. I mean, it is just incredible. Um, I can, you know, I'm going to relate this back to my way back when. One of the things that I have hiding in my background is that I originally graduated in chemical engineering from MIT, and a long time ago. And one of the things that the people at MIT always taught us, it was one of the biggest lessons I learned from the place, is uh, you don't need to know all the answers. You need to know where to go to find the answers. And I think that is the same kind of thing here. If there is an expert in Agile in the world, it's the person that understands that there's so much about Agile that they don't know, that they need to be able to go and find the people who know that and extract that knowledge from those people. Understanding, one of the things that came to mind, Don, when you were talking about the first 4 years, I was going to say that the expert is the one who has finally learned how much they don't really know. And in the agile environment, yes, there are a number of different frameworks. Maybe you won't know. It's the kind of thing where maybe you know Scrum right now. Okay, so you understand Scrum. Hopefully, what will happen with this particular thing, the AAC, with this particular set of information, is that you'll understand and come to appreciate the idea that it's what goes under, it's what's underneath Scrum or any of the other Agile flavors that's really important. If you can get people thinking in the Agile mindset, then how you implement it, everything that you do is flavored by how does this fit together with being Agile? How does doing Agile fit together with being Agile? How are the Scrum things that we're doing, how do they reflect what is really key and core to Agile values? And once you have that kind of thing, you can say, okay, well, now it's just a matter of me going out and saying, okay, how does this flavor reflect those values? It's a lot easier to learn those flavors than it is to learn those values. And I think that that's where a lot of Agile implementations have failed, in that everybody has learned the flavors and not really the values that go into, formulating those flavors. I've mentioned before that I'm kind of a big fan of DSDM, which when I was introduced to it, I said, wow, because DSDM up front says that it's one of the oldest Agile methodologies, and it recognizes the fact that there is, if not necessarily value, there's a need for a lot of the principles of waterfall type development, that people need to be comfortable with understanding how things are being done and being able to wrap their arms around it, that it can't be this amorphous, oh, well, don't worry about it, we're going to get it done because we're being Agile. So the DSDM Agile team actually has a project manager and, has a project manager, a technical owner. It has specific business people, a team of business people that is involved with the project, a team of technical people that's involved with the project, who are ancillary to the actual people who are doing the work. So it's an Agile team that's surrounded by a project management kind of framework. And it really, to my mind, makes a lot of sense. It's something that you can say to people, okay, well, we don't have to completely abandon our waterfall mindset. We have to look at what does the waterfall mindset bring to the table, and then how do we fold that in with an Agile way of doing things. So, and other flavors, are they're different. You mentioned, you guys mentioned Kanban, which is interesting. One of the things that I was just involved with recently is looking more at Jira. Jira is, I don't know if how familiar you all are with Jira, whether or not your teams use Jira. It's the Agile
We've
tool
used
of
Jira.
choice. It's the Agile tool of choice. for management. And one of the things that I was fascinated by with looking at Jira is that Jira allows you to have a project which is a Scrum-based project, which is reflected in a Kanban board, so that you can have both a Scrum board and a Kanban board for the same project. And theoretically, you look at it and say, well, no, these are two completely different things. And yet, if you delve into it, you can say, okay, I can look at this and say, you know, I'm managing my Scrum stories. And part of managing my Scrum stories is the fact that I have all these tasks that go into achieving a Scrum story. Well, I can manage all those tasks in a Kanban kind of way, so that I have Kanban underpinning Scrum and Scrum underpinning Kanban, and they function together. So you have, you know, and they call it Scrumban, but it works if you
Definitely
understand,
seen that.
you know, if you understand what each of those is intended to do, how it's intended to function, and you don't try and say, well, we can only do it one way or another, then you have that adaptive mindset that says, yeah,
And
this
that's
makes sense. Yep.
and that's the
Comment?
problem. Yeah, that's one of the problems I've experienced. We had a VA who came in. She's no longer with the company, but for various reasons. But she came in and she was a certified Scrum Master. So, and my understanding is that with the Scrum Master exam, it's like studying and book knowledge. I don't want to, I'm not trying to put anybody down, but she came in that way, basically. That's what she told us, that was what she did, how she got a certification.
It's a
And
I want to interrupt you there. I believe it's like a 20-page guide. That's all Scrum is, isn't it? Am I right there?
I will. You want my Scrum, my CSM? Why I don't have a CSM anymore?
okay, I gotcha. Okay. So
It
anyway,
was.
she was pushing that was the only way to do it. So yeah, to your point.
Yep. Yep. And that's, it's the real fallacy of agile. When you talk to people who understand agile and you say that there's a way to do agile, they kind of look at you and shake their heads and say, well, the whole idea of agile is you're supposed to be adapting to what you need to do according to the way you need to do it. So to say that there's a way to do agile is not agile. It's almost a joke. I mean, my CSM, the CSM, well, CSM was an interesting thing in that I think everybody understood that it was the Agile Alliance's way of generating cash, I think. It was, let's get everybody on board. My understanding, although I have not gone there, is that there was a new version of CSM, and it may be advanced CSM or something like that, that was coming out or has come out, which really addressed this whole idea that the original CSM was a piece of paper that said, I read the Scrum guide. In fact, when I did my CSM, the instructor said, look, this is a 2-day course. We will cover every question that you will see on the CSM exam. He said, I've taken a 14-year-old Girl Scout through this course, and she was able to pass the Scrum Master exam with no additional study. It's, that's how kind of, I want to say bogus it was, but everybody needed a credential, an Agile credential, so CSM was the way to go. I mean, if you wanted to be hired to do Agile, you had to have a CSM. One of the reasons why you had to have a CSM was because it was so easy to achieve, and it was a set of letters that could filter your resume through to the people who were hiring. Yeah, it didn't make any sense. I think it probably still doesn't make a lot of sense, which is why I just didn't pay any attention to my CSM certification after having gotten it. There are Scrum certifications that do make sense, and they are more serious about really understanding things, about knowing what's going on. But A lot of it comes down to being mature enough to understand Agile and the Agile theories to say, when do I apply this, and how do I apply this, and when does it make sense? And so to Don, to address your statements and your feelings, I think that you start from something that you start and understand that there's a lot more that's out there, and then say, how do I expand on this? So maybe you look at it and say, well, I've heard that DSDM crosses boundaries between Scrum and waterfall, and maybe if that's the mindset that's in my company, I should take a look at that and see, maybe it makes sense to present this as a possibility. I don't have to be an expert in it, but we can look at it and say, would this make sense for our organization? The same thing with things like XP or TDD. Do
Yeah,
look at them and say, it seems like this is a direction that we're wanting to go in, or that could benefit us. Let me take the time to go out and do some more investigation on this.
yes, Tom, and I agree with you. And also to go back to RA's statement is the problem that I run into being older. Again, I spent about I didn't get to my career until a little bit later than the normal person, but the expectations out there are real. That's what I'm running into right now. The expectations out there are just, I would say, almost unreal, coming from the directors and some managers to say, well, you got 8 years of being a BA slash BSA, so you should just know everything. And I'm like, look, I'm the first person to throw both my hands up that says I'm not an expert in anything, but I have been exposed to quite a few things. But again, I'm only exposed, expert, or have experience to the things that I know about. I don't know what else is out there, and
Yep.
and that's some of the tribulations I've had in my career. Um, you know, just saying, well, I don't know this. Someone's gonna have to mentor me, coach me up, and
Mm-hmm.
then the manager or the director is like, well, I don't know it either. Like,
Yep.
okay, fine, we can learn together, but a few times, twice, I've been let go because like that's what we brought you in for. And I'm
Yeah.
like, well, if you don't know it and I don't know it, why am I being let go, or why are we canceling the project? So
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
but
It's
that's
kind of
what
a
I've
sad situation.
hearing from Ingrid and Rabib. Uh, sorry if I mispronounced your name. And just the overall frustration of the truth and the times of implementing and being in the BA world and transitioning from a state of out of waterfall into agile. So there's another nickel for you.
Yep. Yeah, I hear everything that you're saying, and I have experienced everything that you're saying. It really is a difficult circumstance. I can tell you that I watch job postings all the time. I'm always looking at job postings just to see what's out there, and I can't even tell you how many times I've looked at junior BA positions that I said, there's no way I could qualify for that. I can't.
Right,
And
right.
you know,
Junior B,
uh, you look
they
at that
want,
and say, that's ridiculous.
it was. I was almost like they wanted 5 years of Microsoft Teams in one of the job descriptions, and I'm like, Microsoft Teams has only been around for 2 years. No one is going to be qualified for that.
Just to give you an example, I had a recruiter reach out to me they were looking for a Scrum Master with some SQL skills, and mind you, I'm really into SQL, so I've really gone into it and I'm learning modules. And I told the recruiter, I'm up to aggregate functions, I'm working on subqueries, and I'm getting through the course. And that apparently wasn't enough for a junior BSA Scrum Master role. So yeah, it's
Yep. It's intense. I mean, I have said to people, I look at things and say, they expect you to do every job from the CIO to the janitor in order to be an entry level BA. But
But
that's
paying for only one.
Yep. Anyway, that's a digression. So let's go back to here. Wow, I think we've kind of beat that one to death. And this is what we've been talking about already. You know, there's this urgency to do things faster, to do more, better, faster, quicker, cheaper, all of those things. And you know, if you don't understand what needs to be done and understand the value of, I want to say, doing it right the first time, then you're never going to be quick. You're always going to be fixing. You know, there's the old saw about we never have time to do it right, but we always have time to fix it. This is what agile analysis is about, is the whole idea of how do we do it right the first time. And we'll see this, you know, as we go into breaking down this whole idea that I've mentioned of doing the right thing at the right time to the right level of detail. That is key, and once we understand that and can look at things from that perspective, then we put ourselves on the path to saying, okay, yeah, at this particular point in time, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to know in order to make the next decision, to move to the next step. And if we do that efficiently and don't get bogged down in the but we don't know about this, but we don't have this, and but we're not, you know, ready for that yet, those are the kinds of things that slow us down. On that happy note, it's almost noon, and we're kind of a little bit long for a break. So, can we take a 10-minute break? We may finish up early. I'm gonna have to take a look and see exactly how much more we have on the docket for today. But the schedule would put us, having the better part of an hour to finish up for the day. So I'm going to propose that we take like a 10 or 11 or 12-minute break instead of a 15-minute break, and come back at 10 minutes after the hour and proceed forward. Anybody have any objections to that one?
No.
Okay, I'll see you guys at 10 after the hour.
Okay.
This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so we're back, heading into the home stretch. And we kind of have hit why are we doing agile analysis. Basically, it's a speed thing, and it's also that agile is being adopted across the industries, across many industries, and so it's important for us to be an active participant in that. 5 top benefits of agile adoption. Well, there are a lot of things that agile brings to the table. Faster delivery speed, time to market. I've talked about that already, and I, again, think that this is something where there's a little bit of a misunderstanding. I think that this would probably be better expressed if there was a focus on the delivery of value to the organization as opposed to simply delivery speed and time to market. Obviously, if you're working from the concept of things like a minimal viable product where you want to get something out into the marketplace, agile makes sense because you target the development towards the things that are going to provide functionality as quickly as possible, but not necessarily all of the functionality that you want or need in your product. And that's also true internally. If you're developing internal applications, again, you can look at it and say, okay, what's going to give us the best bang for the buck in terms of our speed or in terms of our delivery, but it's not necessarily how do we deliver everything faster, it's how do we deliver what matters faster. Increased team productivity. We'll see that there's a lot of focus on doing the things that need to be done and not doing the things that don't need to be done. If you have a good agile paradigm, if you have a good set of agile functions and people are doing things that they need to do, yes, you will increase your team productivity, because one of the things that you're looking at is, how do I not do things that we don't need to be doing? How do we not waste time? Improved ability to manage changing priorities. Part and parcel of the whole agile paradigm is that it's not about making a decision and then going forward hell-bent on that decision with no possibility for change. One of the things that most of the agile methodologies focus on is the idea of making change easier to accomplish. So if you don't have a massive infrastructure that requires that you jump through all sorts of and kinds of hoops and waste a whole lot of time trying to get people to agree that you're going to do something different, yeah, you can do it a lot more quickly. Better project visibility has to do with the idea that in the agile paradigms, the focus is on integrating the people who are delivering the product with the people who are going to be using the product, the customers. There's a lot of focus put on that being a collaborative arrangement as opposed to a throw it over the wall arrangement. And that really does apply. You know, what's bubbling around in my head right now is thinking about building a house using an agile paradigm and saying, you know, a really good architectural firm, people who are doing these kinds of projects, wants to be sure that what they're providing for their customers is what the customers need and what the customers want, and they want to keep the customers engaged. If you're having a house built, it would be nice if the builders said, do you want to see where we're at, or can you take a look at things, and we can maintain a discussion so that if something does change, you're right there as a part of the process. And that's what most of the agile methodologies focus on, is keeping that connection between the customers who are going to be using the product and the people who are going to be developing the product. And better business and IT alignment, because a lot of these are about the development of software solutions. It's you want your business and your IT people to be talking to each other and not playing this who's on which side of the fence kind of game, and the standard classic waterfall finger pointing kinds of things. These are the kinds of things that Agile tries to break down. The what and the why of the IIBA AAC. Okay, it's yeah. The why is more, you see a couple of things if you look at the graphic on the right hand side of the screen. It highlights things that I've already mentioned about the deal of being agile and doing agile being two different things. They're really not the same, and if you perceive of them as being the same, you're going to be looking at a world of hurt. You have to understand how to be agile in order to do agile. Becoming an AAC, being an agile certified business analyst, it's focusing, giving you a little bit of legitimacy, extra legitimacy, so that not only are you a business analyst, but you're a business analyst who has spent the time, made the investment to understand more about the agile paradigm, and presumably to be able to help your organization to better implement whatever flavor of agile you are doing. BA is the fastest growing career opportunity for IT professionals. That's been put out there a lot, certainly by the IIBA, and there are job statistics, although I don't have them off the top of my head, that support this, that BA is a very growing kind of thing as people understand the need for business analysis, the value that business analysis brings to the table, certainly in the IT world, that there are opportunities for BAs. There are going to be more opportunities for BAs. There certainly are going to be more opportunities for BAs who embrace the agile idea of being a well-rounded person. BAs by their nature tend to be well-rounded in terms of their relationships within their organizations. So you're talking about that another term that you've probably seen or heard, the T-shaped individuals, those individuals that know a little bit about a lot of things and know a lot about a small number of things. That being the top of the T being the breadth of your knowledge, and the length of the stem of the T being the depth of your knowledge. I sort of looked at it from in terms of an agile team, and thought, what you really need is everybody on the agile team to have that top bar of the T across there, and everybody on the agile team to have a depth, but where that depth comes down in the overall picture of the T is different for each member of the team, or each different flavor of the people on the team, so that the BA might be a T where the vertical bar is in the center, and maybe the product owner is a T where his vertical bar is way over to the left, and a tester is where his or her vertical bar is over to the right, and you run a spectrum so that the vertical bar on the T kind of migrates and moves, so that you always have a slightly different look of your T. Better job prospects, obviously, the more things that you can do, the more things that you know, the more value you can bring to your organization, the better positioned you are within your organization to rise up, to be able to move around, to be able to move across, to be able to influence things up, down, and across. I think that, and I've said this to people, that I think that the next generation of certainly CIOs and CEOs that are coming around are going to have some population, and probably some heavy population, from the BA community. The people who take the time to learn about things, the people who take the time to be interested and aware of things. These are valuable, they're valuable outlooks at the higher levels of the organization. The other thing that I think is very critical about this is that, because of the nature of what BAs do, we're forced into being collaborative and appreciating the value of collaboration, appreciating the value that other people bring to the table. And this is something that really, to my mind, plays well in the C-level offices, where a CIO doesn't need to know everything. A CIO needs to be able to gather people around him who know him or her. I should always qualify that, because I think hers are right up there, or should be right up there. But the person that's sitting in that chair needs to be able to have a group of people around that chair that can basically provide the input and the knowledge that that person does not have, and to be able to establish an effective team across the organization that can accomplish things. And obviously, the more you know, the better you are, the more money you can get paid. So the AAC certification is designed for a broad spectrum of people. It's not only BAs who are part of Agile projects, it's also BA consultants, and consultants of any nature, and certainly trainers, people like myself. The AAC certification. Now, I've said that the AAC is a knowledge-based certification. It does expect or recommend that you have 2 to 3 years of experience with analysis in an Agile context. It's basically self-monitoring and self-measuring. If you feel that you have enough knowledge, and once you go through this and with a little bit of study, certainly for those of you that are CBAPs, there's no doubt in my mind that you guys could blast through this stuff in almost no time and be ready to sit the exam almost immediately, because so much of it is philosophical. It's really just re-emphasizing and refocusing the things that you know how to do as a good BA. It's aligned with the Agile extension. And we'll take a look at it. If you have not got a copy of it, if you're an IIBA member, it's a free download. If you're not an IIBA member, you can become an IIBA member and grab it. You also have the adaptive study guide, which, while it doesn't necessarily mirror the Agile extension, it certainly covers basically all of the information that's in the Agile extension. The exam is aligned with the Agile extension. Everything that you need to know in order to pass the exam will be found in the Agile extension. The certification and the certification exam, the way it operates, it's answering questions focused on real world scenarios, but not in too much depth. You're certainly not going to be expected to be able to take a detailed scenario and answer questions about how that would be done in an Agile environment. It's more about conceptually, do you understand that these are the kinds of things that you're going to be looking at this particular level? These are the things that you should be focusing on at whatever level you are functioning, and we'll talk more about those levels over the next couple of sessions. It was developed in collaboration with the Agile Alliance, so that the people who are focused on Agile had a lot to say about the way this was going to be done and how it was going to be put together. And it's intended to give you the way to add some more value, no matter what sort of Agile approach you are involved with. No matter what flavor of Agile you have, the things that you learn in achieving this certification will be of value. So here's really the first time that we're going to delve into what is this perspective of Agile from the IIBA's perspective about. Similar to what happens with the BABOK and with the CBAP and CCBA exams, IIBA breaks up the overall picture into a set of discrete chunks. In terms of the BABOK itself, those are the different knowledge areas of the BA practice. And in terms of Agile, it is these basic 4 areas, which are what they consider knowledge areas, so that the Agile mindset are the overall principles and practices that you need to function in any sort of Agile environment. They're the high-level kinds of things that you need to be thinking about. Then it breaks it down into looking more from, I want to say, a tactical kind of viewpoint. It's breaking the process of doing change in the organization down to these things that they call horizons, where the strategy horizon is the high-level organizational horizon, where the organization itself needs to figure out what it's trying to do. And again, we'll talk more about these as we go further forward, but at a high level, it's the highest level where the decisions are made as to what gets done across the organization. The initiative horizon, moving that down to a more tactical level of saying, okay, as an organization, these are the things, this is a thing that we want to do, this is a thing that we need to do. What kinds of things do we need to do in order to accomplish that, given the way our business functions? My take on this is that you would be looking at this from a classic organization of, broken down into sort of silos that say there's a finance function, there's an HR function, there's an IT function, there's a sales function, there's a marketing function. All of those things need to combine together to achieve a strategic goal. How does that strategic goal impact each one of those areas? What kinds of things are going to need to be done in any or all of those areas in order for us to achieve a strategic goal? Those would be the initiatives that we would need to implement in order to achieve our strategic goal. And then the delivery horizon being down into, okay, for each one of those tactical objectives, what are the real details of the product or the solution that we need to put together in order to be able to basically fulfill those tactical goals? That's the way it's broken down. Does that sound reasonable to everybody? Does that make sense? Kind of clear?
Yep.
Okay, good. Because those are key. These are the things that, and what we'll see, because the actual things that you have to do, the actual techniques that you're going to implement are in many ways substantially the same across those horizons. You need to be very careful about understanding what we're doing at what particular level. That's going to be a key to passing the exam, is to being able to say, oh, we're talking about strategy here. In the strategy, how does this particular technique or this particular principle apply? Okay, so to delve a little further into those domains, the agile mindset, it's about, again, the high level kinds of things that flavor everything that we do. It's, looking at just from the highest level, again, looking at the Agile Manifesto, which is in and of its nature a high level kind of document, and saying overall, when we do our whatever we're going to do, whatever projects we're involved in, whatever initiatives we're involved in, whatever strategic objectives we're involved in, we want to be looking at the principles and the guidelines of the Agile Manifesto and saying, how is that reflected in this particular activity? The strategy horizon, it's again, this is strategy horizon I find particularly interesting because in my own experience, it's the area where BAs, those people who are really focused on the BA function, have traditionally been ignored. It's always been strategy is not the BA's responsibility. The executives in the organization are the ones who develop the strategy, and the BA's responsibility is simply to implement that strategy or to work within the confines of that strategy. I think that's a short-sighted way of looking at things. I think that executives can have a tendency to be a little bit myopic and not consider the downstream impacts of their strategic decisions because they don't necessarily involve a BA function traditionally. They miss those kinds of things, and that it would be helpful and useful for BAs to be involved in those kinds of strategy kinds of things, and if not to be involved in those strategy kinds of things, to have the freedom and the ability to ask questions about those kinds of strategy kinds of things, just so that you understand clearly what's going on in the organization, how those strategic decisions are intended to impact downstream. I have seen so many projects, and this is reflected in my own history of where the team that's developing a solution or building a product or working on an application really doesn't have any idea of why they're doing it. My One of my previous bosses actually said to me, before I was really involved, when I was at the development level, before I really got involved in doing business analysis, he said, you're one of the few people around this organization, certainly around the IT side of this organization, who actually asks, why are we doing this? Not just what do I need to do, but why are we doing this? I think this is an area where there's a real opportunity for BAs. It's a tricky opportunity. It's um, going thinking about how it's advisable or you know a good idea to function as a BA, and I've certainly seen this done and done it myself in terms of working at any level as a BA, approaching things from the perspective of, I need to challenge this assumption. I need to challenge what we're doing, but I can't challenge it in a way that's going to offend people. If I just come out and sit in a room with people and say, why the hell are we doing this? They're going to be offended. They're going to say, you're questioning my intelligence, you're questioning my knowledge, you're questioning my authority, you're questioning things. Well, I need to question all those things, but I need to do it in a way that respects their authority, respects their knowledge. So I need to come at it from the perspective of, can you help me to understand this? Because I really don't understand this. I need to, I want to do what you need to do. I certainly will do what you need to do, but I need to understand it. And so questioning it in that way, that sort of idea, that sort of focus allows them to be an expert, allows them to be the boss. And I would say one of the things that, you should tuck away in your mindset is when they say, because I said so, is when you really have to worry. That's when you need to say, okay, I need to understand that this person is either not capable of articulating what they know, or they really don't know what they're articulating, and I need to be really careful about that. That to me is kind of a BA's red flag, where when you get the because I told you so, you need to say, okay, here's something that we're going to need to make sure we get right. And that's at the strategy level. The expectation is not that you're a strategy expert. The expectation is simply that you understand that there are high-level decisions that are critical to the functioning of the organization, and you need to be aware of them, mindful of them, and seeking to understand them. The initiative horizon. These statements are the statements on these slides are really kind of a little weird. Again, the initiative horizon is more of a tactical level. There is a strategic goal that this organization has to accomplish, and in order to accomplish that goal, there are going to be a number of different areas within the organization who are going to be impacted by our moves to achieve that strategic goal. This is where we start to define, okay, what are the things that we need to do in order to deal with the impact to our particular tactical area. I can see pictures of, I know in the healthcare company that I worked for, we were introducing a new product. I was actually involved in the initiation of the healthcare exchange. And this was a new product that was going to impact across the entire organization. I mean, there were obviously financial impacts, there were marketing impacts, there were just product development impacts, there were customer service impacts. They're just, all of those areas were going to be impacted. Certainly, claims, enrollment, all of those areas were going to be impacted, and impacted heavily by the introduction of this new product, this new paradigm. And we had to address going to each of those areas and saying, okay, what is this new product line going to do for you? And in each one of those environments, each one of those areas, it was, okay, well, this is what we do that supports a product in this organization. Given what this product is, this is what we see are going to be the impacts to our area. These are the tools that we use in order to do our job. So these are the tools that are potentially going to have to be expanded, extended, or modified in order for us to be able to continue to effectively do our job within the confines of this new product. Those are the initiative level kinds of things. It's where projects really start to take form, where they really start to have a good deal of substance, where the detail starts to be added to the project. And that's where, traditionally, that's where a lot of BAs start to get involved. It's like, okay, we've got, we know we have a project. Now we need to get a BA in there to get us the requirements.
I had a quick question from
Sure.
a detail perspective. At this point, is it basically, these initiatives are basically being broken down to epics on a product backlog, or am I kind of on the right track there?
Absolutely. This is the initiative horizon is where that level of detail would and should be fleshed out. At the strategic level, all we want to know is this is a product. This is a product that we want to implement. Okay, we know we have a product. This is a particular piece of that product that we're going to work on. That would be an initiative. And then, okay, what are the specific high level things about that piece of the product that we're going to need to consider? So we're working, we're basically working top down from this perspective. We're starting from something very high level, and we're adding a level of a layer of detail. Here we're starting to add that the epic level of detail. So we're still at a fairly high level, but we're starting to get more detail. Okay. And then we go to the delivery horizon, which is where we really start to say, okay, we've got our epics pretty well clear. We've picked a couple of these, or we've started to break these epics down into stories. That would be work that would be done at the part of the as a detailed part of the initiative level, where we start to say we've got these epics and we need to start breaking them down into stories. And then at the delivery horizon, we're talking about, okay, these are the stories that we're going to deliver, and this is these are the particular little bits and pieces that we have, and now we need to refine them so that we have sufficient detail for the ones that we've chosen at any particular point in time to implement. So you see it coming down, and it really is a dangerous part of the agile paradigm, that people have a tendency to drive to that delivery level of detail much too early in the process. That's one of the things that has been at a higher level addressed by the agile paradigm, is to say, if we're talking about like, to take a crazy example, we need to improve our penetration in the market by 10% this year. Okay, that's a strategic objective for the company. If we take that, and because we're sort of not really keyed into the whole agile kind of thing, if we take that and our next step is, well, what color do the buttons need to be on our website? We've just skipped so many levels that it's not even funny. And yet that's where, because that's the easiest kind of thing to see. It's the easiest kind of thing to deal with. It's the least threatening kind of thing to deal with, that there is a natural tendency amongst people in organizations to drive to that level as fast as possible. Well, how can we deliver a product if we don't know what color the buttons are? You know, so we'll focus on what color the buttons are and totally miss the whole process that takes us down to how does the color of the buttons ultimately going to impact us increasing our market share by 10%. If we can't make that connection, then we've just skipped so much of what needs to be done, what should have been done, and what frequently doesn't get done in our environments. So the whole idea of adopting an agile paradigm and a mindset that says, okay, all the information that we have right now is a 10% increase in our customer base, in our market penetration. What do we need to know in order to move forward on that? Well, what we need to know is who's going to be impacted by that, who can help us, which areas of our organization can help us achieve that 10% increase, and take the information down to that level of detail before we go any further. So there's always this push pull, and we'll see some more about that as we because none of that happens in isolation. Interestingly enough, that's one of the things about the whole this whole horizon kind of thing and the whole agile mindset, is that although it happens in sort of discrete areas, it happens holistically. We'll see that all of the horizons ultimately tie together, and one of the keys to successful agile delivery is going to be to maintain that connection so that we know what is happening at what level and what level we're functioning at this particular point in time. Okay. So the delivery horizon is where we focus on the what color are the buttons kind of thing. The pattern for the exam, it's 85 multiple choice questions, 2 hours to complete it. The breakdown of the different knowledge areas that will be covered. You can see the two things that should be pretty apparent from this is that there is a good focus on the agile mindset. It's the underpinning of everything, so that there's a significant amount of focus on that. And because of the nature of the way BAs and the BA function operates right now, the delivery horizon has the most level of detail, and it's where a lot of the work really gets done in terms of agile analysis. It's where a lot of the time is going to be spent. Now, that having been said, you can also see that the strategy horizon is a much lighter area. And the interesting thing about that is that it still comes down to that the same kinds of activities, the same kinds of knowledge, the same kinds of techniques, the same, really the same principles operate at all of these levels, so that it's not that we're ignoring the strategy horizon. You're going to see the same kinds of things as we delve into the principles and the underpinnings of it. They're going to apply at that level. They're just not going to be questioned as much. You're not going to be questioned that much on them. The passing score is 52 points out of 85 questions. Quickly, the pricing information for the exam, it's $250 for an IABA member, $375 for a non-member. If any of you are non-members and are intending on taking the or looking at taking the exam, the difference is $125, and $125 is the initial fee to become an IABA member. So if you're not a member and you're planning on taking it, you're well advised to just become a member. It'll cost you the same amount to take the exam, and there are lots of other perks that you get being an IIBA member. Retakes, $200 for a retake. There are some of the plans that Adaptive offers in conjunction with this training do cover that. If you, by any strange circumstance, should manage to fail the exam, you know, it's out there and available. Again, as a non-member, it's more expensive, and the certification is good for 3 years, and will have to be renewed in 3 years. That's the cost. Because the certification is only a year plus old, they haven't finished ironing out all the details of what that is going to be, whether you'll have to retake the exam or retake an exam, or whether it will just be a matter of doing educational kinds of things, reviewing, basically reinforcing your knowledge. That stuff has yet to be decided by the IIBA. The process, the first bullet here says become an IIBA member. That is not a requirement, as I indicated before. Actually, you can do the whole process and register for the whole exam without becoming an IIBA member. But again, it's worth it to do it for all of these things. Even the Agile extension, if you're not a member, you have to buy it. If you're a member, you get a copy for free. There is in case you're not familiar with the IIBA, it has access to an online library of BA references, and also includes project management references, includes business references, several hundred books, many thousands of dollars worth of books that are available to you online at any point in time. You can read them, or you can, investigate them. It's available as a part of your IIBA membership. And as an IIBA member, you can continue to communicate and be a part of what's going on. The IIBA has local chapters. In fact, I have been a longtime member of the New York IIBA chapter. The chapters hold different events throughout the year, chapter meetings where frequently there are presenters who come in and will deliver presentations on various different aspects of the BA community. We had last week, the New York chapter had a presentation on blockchain, which was very interesting. We've had presentations on any number of different things, including technical kinds of things, the newest updates to Visio, BA processes. We've just had a number of different things. There are some chapters around the country that are even more active than the New York chapter is. There are chapters that sponsor day-long, they call them BA learning days, or they'll have a mini conference where people can come in for a day and see a series of presentations. These are put together by the local chapters of the IIBA. Definitely worthwhile, something that's worthwhile examining, more than just being a plain IIBA member. Getting involved with the local chapters to see what's out there makes a lot of sense. There are study groups. New York chapter is right now just initiated a CBAP study group. Excuse me. The Kentucky chapter just recently, I believe, completed an AAC study group where they just solicited members to get together on a weekly basis to, go over things like the Agile extension or the BABOK, and basically collaborate on a student level to discuss these things. Normally, the way that kind of thing works is that they will have outside people, whether they be CBAPs or AACs, to come in and monitor and mentor and manage those study groups to help people to prepare for their certification exams. And they also actually, for things like ECBA and CBAP and CCBA, they provide for a certain number of your learning requirements, PDUs, contact hours. Continuing in the certification process, obviously we suggest that you take training from somebody like Adaptive US. You know, there's interestingly enough, Adaptive also provides access to its published training materials as a separate product. You can get the training materials. Obviously, that's not relevant to you guys, but the training materials are available. This is just an added perk to have somebody like me sitting here that you can discuss these things with. And so that's a value add for taking these courses. You can download the Agile extension if you haven't already, and haven't done that already. Certainly, I would suggest doing that. It's only about 110 pages long, so it's not a really disastrous type of read, unlike the Babok, which is 500 or 600 pages. And then we recommend the possibility of starting a study group or joining a study group if that's out there. It's it's not something that I would say is really critical, but again, it depends on your level of experience, your level of understanding of Agile. When I did my certification, I had a couple of Agile certifications already, and was pretty well versed in the whole Agile mindset and Agile framework. So for me, it was more about reviewing the Agile extension to just make sure that I was aligned with the way the Agile extension was expecting me to understand this, as opposed to someone who has less experience, who is just, learning the ropes. For the actual certification examination, one thing to be aware, and it sort of follows on what I just mentioned, is that this is specifically related to information in the Agile extension of the body of knowledge, so that some of the things that you're going to see and hear over the course of the next couple of sessions may not completely align with the way you currently do things or the way your organization currently does things. If you want to pass the exam, you need to know the way the IIBA views these things. That goes right down to terminology. Some of the terminology may be slightly different from what you're used to. In preparing for the exam, you want to focus on what the Agile extension defines as the terminology, so that you don't get tripped up. And you could get tripped up where an answer for a multiple choice question might include two possible answers, one of which is the specific answer from the body of knowledge, and the other of which is a similar term which is in general use throughout the throughout the environment, where you might think of things in those terms, and you're not going to get credit for the one that you know. You're going to get credit for knowing the one that the Agile extension has. Okay. This follows that. Follows on that. We're hammering away at that, because it's really, it'd be really a sad thing if you really knew this stuff, but you just didn't quite have the terminology right, and you wound up missing questions on the exam simply because you perceived of something from a different set of terminology. And this is to kind of beat the horse a little bit more. It's also something that happens frequently in organizations and frequently in projects, where people don't understand the terminology quite the same way. There's a little bit of gray and fuzzy in understanding the terms in a project, and one of the challenges for a BA is always to make sure that everybody understands things the same way, so that having a good solid glossary is a big perk and a big benefit for projects anyway. This extends that to the whole Agile paradigm, so that having a good Agile glossary is going to go a long way in your success in passing the exam. There will be there are a couple of things. There are multiple choice questions. There will be times when there will be more than one correct answer to a question, and your challenge will be to understand which is the best of those answers. Uh, my recollection of the exam was I didn't recall too many of those kinds of things where I thought there wasn't really you know, an option that if I thought about it I couldn't clearly come up with. But there were some where there were a couple of, where it was a choice between two different answers, and I did have to think about it to really analyze it a little bit clearer and really read the answers and look for keys and look for cues that said, okay, yeah, this is what they're talking about. Um, while it's a high level kind of thing, there are very few places where you're going to be given a long list of things as a potential answer. There are some techniques, and I've seen this in both the Agile extension and in the Babok, where there are a lot of things that could apply. The techniques that might be relevant for a particular task could be a huge list of them. In general, that's not the case, and in general, it's not the kind of thing that you would be expected to really know. You know, it doesn't make sense for you to have to memorize long lists of things. Just be aware. When you're looking at long lists of things, my tip would be to look for the ones that are outliers. Look for the ones that are okay. For instance, you'll find that workshops and interviews are techniques that are applicable across just almost every task that you could define as a BA. They're always going to be a part of the list. If you have a list of techniques, look for the one that might be an outlier. That is something that you would say, okay, this is one that I would not think would be applicable to any other task or any other area than this specific one. And sometimes those will be the ones that you'll be able to spot in an answer and say, oh, they mentioned that. That means they are talking about this. We'll see that in some of the definitions. So we're coming up to the end, and actually we're right at 1 o'clock, but I'm gonna continue on for just a couple of seconds here to say we had these were the module objectives that were outlined for today. We were looking at business analysis. What is it and who does it? We talked about the IIBA. We talked about the Agile extension to the BA body of knowledge. Talked a little bit about why people do things Agile, why there's an AAC. We at a high level looked at an introduction to the way the IIBA defines the Agile paradigm, and we talked about the things that you might want or need to do in order to achieve the AAC. So my first question before I go to the next slide is, did we cover all of that to everybody's sort of satisfaction?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Good on that. I mentioned at the outset that you want to make some either mental or physical notes to what we're doing. So as we go along, one of the things that I'm going to try to do is for each of our modules say, okay, did we do anything that aligned with your objectives, or were the things that we covered aligned with your objectives? Was there anything that we covered that was not in line with your objectives that you feel, was valuable to add to your objectives? And this we'll see a bit more tomorrow. This last question is there anything that you think you could apply? As we leave, take these questions to heart and think about it a little bit and say, okay, how did we do, or what did we do, and did we accomplish what we wanted to accomplish? How does it impact on what I'm doing? I will say, before I close, if anybody has any questions, I'll hang out for a little while until you guys say you're happy and you want to leave. I don't really have anything on my calendar, but if you come up with any questions over the course of tonight, this afternoon, tonight, certainly feel free to drop me an email. If you have any comments that you want to do privately, certainly drop me in a message. I didn't give you my email address, although you all got an email from me today, so it'll be there if you need to communicate with me via email. Send me a message, and I will try and check in later tonight and see if I can handle any questions. Anybody want to throw anything out on the table right now before we close down? Okay.
Great start. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I will, if I can get my mouse back, I will pause my recording.
This conference will now be recorded.